How do you know if the law that is imposed on you is in fact a valid law in the country? What gives the judges the right to adjudicate disputes? What gives the parliament the right to create laws? According to Hart, the answer might lie in the union of primary and secondary rules. Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. In this channel, we try to break down complex legal theories in simple terms. In today's episode, we're going to talk about one of the most influential writers in the 20th century, that's H.L.A. Hart, and his ideas of the union of primary and secondary rules. According to Hart, this concept is key to understanding what a legal system is and why it functions the way it does. Let's get started. First of all, who was H.L.A. Hart? Herbert Lionel Adolphus Hart, better known as H.L.A. Hart, was a British legal philosopher and professor at Oxford. In his 1961 book, The Concept of Law, he revolutionized legal theory by challenging the status quo of both legal positivism and natural law traditions. He starts by asking one of the most loaded questions in legal philosophy: what is law? And more importantly, he believes that law is different to simply orders backed by threats. This arises from the fact that most positivists, especially writers like John Austin, believe that law is a set of orders which are backed by punishments. Hart believes law is far more complex than that. If you want to understand how Austin saw the law, you can check out my video on it. A pop-up for it should be appearing on the screen now. Hart explains that there are two types of laws or rules in a legal system. These are primary rules and secondary rules. He explains that only when a society has both these types of rules can we consider it to be a mature legal system. First up, we have primary rules. These are the rules that directly regulate behavior. Think of these as the do's and don'ts in a society. For example, laws which say don't steal, or don't commit murder, or pay your taxes are primary rules in a legal system. They impose certain obligations on the people. Sounds simple enough, right? But here's the problem. Hart believes that these rules alone are insufficient to form a legal system. A society which has only primary rules will have issues like uncertainty, static nature, and inefficiency in enforcement. Uncertainty is not knowing what exactly is a valid rule in the society. For example, if somebody walked up to you and asked you to follow a law you've never heard of before, how do you know whether this particular law is in fact a law in your country? Hart says that if there are only primary rules, there's no way for us to identify whether this particular law is in fact a law in your country or not, thus creating the uncertainty. Staticness arises from not having a way to change the primary rules in the system. If the society only has primary rules which impose obligations, there's no way for the law to be changed and to create new laws. And finally, inefficiency arises when there is no person or body authorized to adjudicate on disputes with regard to rules. Basically, there's no way to identify if somebody has broken the law or not. Now, this is where Hart's genius kicks in. To solve this problem, Hart believes that there are secondary rules in the legal system. While primary rules tells us what to do, like do not steal, the secondary rules are about how to recognize, change, and interpret those primary rules. They form the legal infrastructure that transforms a collection of rules into a legal system. Hart identifies three core types of secondary rules. Number one, the rule of recognition. This rule answers the question of whether a particular law is a valid law in the society, and it cures uncertainty arising in a legal system. Now, this rule of recognition is not written down in any place, but it is understood and practiced by the officials of the legal system like judges and lawmakers. The rule of recognition is like the master rule that tells us what law to follow. Number two, the rules of change. As societies evolve, so must their laws. The rules of change give officials the power to create, amend, or repeal laws. This cures staticness in a legal system. Without these rules of change, societies would be stuck with outdated laws, unable to adapt. Think about constitutional amendments, legislative reforms, or even simple acts of parliament. That's the rule of change in action. Number 3, the rules of adjudication. Now disputes happen. So who decides if someone has broken the law? The rules of adjudication empower certain people like judges to interpret and apply the law and cure the inefficiency arising in a legal system. So if the primary rules are about behavior, then the secondary rules are about authority, structure, and process. Together, they form the institutional backbone of the legal system. In short, secondary rules provide structure to the legal system. Without them, primary rules are like scattered instructions without an instruction manual. And now, the key idea of the union of primary and secondary rules. Hart argues that a legal system exists when a society has both primary rules that govern behavior and secondary rules that provide a framework for recognizing, modifying, and enforcing those primary rules. And this union of primary and secondary rules cures problems like uncertainty, staticness, and inefficiency, and separates a legal system from a simply primitive society. So why should we care about this idea of the union of primary and secondary rules? It's because Hart helps us to understand law as not simply a set of commands made by some ruler, but as a structured system which can be improved, challenged, and justified. Let's unpack this significance. Firstly, it explains how legal systems work. Hart's model shows us that law isn't simply about somebody barking orders at us, but it's a complex social practice with accepted rules and procedures. The rule of recognition, for example, shows us why the constitution of a country is considered binding. It's considered binding because the constitution is validated by the rule of recognition. And the rule of recognition becomes valid because the people obey it and the officials accept it. Secondly, it separates law from morality. Unlike natural law theorists, Hart argues that law and morality are separate things. So a rule can be valid even if it is immoral, if it fits within the criteria of the secondary rules. This helps us to analyze unjust legal systems without denying them legal status. Think of apartheid laws in South Africa or Nazi laws. They were morally wrong but legally valid under that system's rule of recognition. Thirdly, it makes room for legal change and debate. Because secondary rules guide us on how law is made and changed, it opens the door for legal reform. Want to change a discriminatory law in your country? You can use the rule of change and Parliament can change that law. Want to challenge a law's constitutionality? You can use the rule of adjudication and challenge it in court. It shows us that the laws are not static and in fact that they are dynamic and you can work within the system to achieve change. Fourthly, it helps us to understand all types of legal systems. Hart's framework is useful beyond any single country. You can apply it to compare democracies, authoritarian regimes, or tribal societies. It lets us ask, do they have a rule of recognition? Who decides what counts as law? And how is law changed or interpreted? This makes Hart's theory a powerful analytical tool for legal scholars, lawmakers, and even political theorists. In the end, Hart's theory shows us that law is far more complex than simply orders backed by a punishment. It's an evolving structure of authority, interpretation, and shared understanding. And if we understand this structure, we are in a better place to defend justice, to demand reform, and understand power. And that's a wrap on H.L.A. Hart and his ideas about the union between primary and secondary rules. As always, if you found this video useful, please do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.